Shalom. Giving all praises to Yahweh Bashem Al Shai Bashem Rakakodah. Shalom to the 144,000 and the rest of the elect out there. Shalom to you all. Make this quick. Anyway, I'm going to entitle this video, The Apostle Paul Told the Israelites to Keep the Laws. When I say keep the laws, it's talking about the laws that go back, that the Most High Yahweh gave to Moses. Yahweh Bashem Yahushua gave to Moses. Now there were certain passages, like for example, Acts 15. You got to read that, where the argument was. When you read the first couple of verses, you'll get what I'm talking about. It was called the Jerusalem Council by scholars, and it was concerning, I believe it was two Pharisees or priests that believed, because you had Pharisees that believed in the Messiah. You had priests that believed in the Messiah. That's a belief. That's in Acts chapter 6. It mentions the word the priest. So some of them that were established priests and even certain members of the Sadducees and the scribes. So there was like a split there. Some of them said, nope, that's the Messiah. Anyway, so the question was asked concerning circumcision in Acts chapter 15. And I got to do a whole breakdown on that. That says a whole lot. A big controversy with James making a statement. He quotes, what is that? Amos 9, verse 12. And it's talking about Edom, but it doesn't mention it in Acts. And I'm going to get all into that in another video. I'm not going to delve into that quite yet. But when the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter said, you don't got to get circumcised and you don't got to keep all the laws, but certain laws you have to keep, about blood from animals, and because you got sick diseases from that, you can die, and adultery, which was spoken about in First Corinthians chapter 5. You can start from the first verse and read down. I'm not going to go all into detail into that, but there was an individual that was part of the church of Corinth that was committing adultery with his father's wife, and the Apostle Paul condemned him for that, because that's a law unto death. So the Apostle Paul did teach the law, but he didn't push. He taught. You know what he did? The Israelites that knew that they were Israelites, that was raised as Israelites, he said, you guys are required to keep the law. I am required to keep the law. That's in Philippians. I went through it the other day. He said, if in not too many words, if you want to have a contest as to who keep the law, who's an expert in the law, who's authority on keeping the law, I'll beat you all the time. Because he was trained by Gamaliel. His father was a Pharisee. Paul's father was a Pharisee. So he kept the laws. Did he keep all the laws perfectly? No. Romans 7 tell you that. So when he stressed the law in Romans, 3 verse 31, I believe you can start at the 31st verse, the 30th verse, 30 and 31. 31, I believe, is a key verse. I'm not going to go to it. Somebody can put it in the chat. He said, yea, you established the law. He was telling you to keep the laws. So you might ask, well, wait a minute. What about Acts 15? Peter said, you don't got to keep all the laws. And then in Colossians 2 verse 16, you read a couple of verses down. I'm not going to go to it and make this short. Try to keep this short. He said, don't let men judge you pursuant to high holy days and Sabbath and so forth, and what foods and so forth. In other words, don't let no man push the law on you, which is a shadow of things to come. Meaning in the kingdom, you're going to keep the laws. He was not talking about Israelites that were raised up as Israelites from birth, circumcised on the 8th day, the whole nine. He was talking about Israelites that came back into the fold, which they called Gentiles. When you see the word Gentile in the New Testament and it was talking about blessings, the Christians say, well, the Gentiles, Gentile, those are talking about Israelites that did not grow up. In other words, their parents didn't circumcise them on the 8th day. In their household, they wasn't speaking Hebrew. They were not keeping the dietary menus. They were just lost Israelites. But so when Paul, he spoke to two groups of people. He spoke to the Israelites, Corinth, Colossus, Ephesus, Macedon, all these different places. Some of them knew that they were Israelites. Greece, Athens, Acts 17. He was obviously talking to the men of Athens. These were Israelites. Don't know they're white people. That's Greek. No, Jake was all up in Athens. Remember, Jake was spread all over the place. So when he was talking to them, he knew that they didn't. He knew that they wouldn't keep the laws. They didn't know that they were Israelites. Period. So the first thing that he had to do was, they knew that there was a God, there was a higher power than them, and he said that higher power is Yahweh Shai, and the higher power over him is Yahweh. So he didn't say keep the laws. Like for IUIC, you got to keep the laws, brother. You got to keep the laws, sister. You know, you don't tell them that. They're Gentiles. They're in a Gentile state of mind. So when the Apostle Paul told them to keep, he established the law, he was talking about the Israelites that knew that they were Israelites. He said, no, continue to keep the law. And it didn't mean we were going to be saved. That's in more than one place, but one place is in Romans 9, I believe it's around the 31st verse. I'm not going to go to it. Somebody can put it in the chat. Where it says in not too many words, you're not going to be saved by the law. So for you Christians say, see, them Hebrew Israelites say you got to keep the law perfectly. Now, what about the grace? Well, I know GMS never said that. We say you got to be under grace. Now, IUIC is going off because they tell you, if you don't keep the laws, you're going to burn in hell. Remember the rich young man? And that's the wrong scripture to use. Matthew's, 16 and 19? I believe it's 16 and 19. And it said that he kept all the laws. The Lord said, "You lacking one thing. Give all that you have as a rich man. Become poor. Give it to the poor and follow me." He couldn't do it, so he didn't. The laws wasn't going to get him. All right, get him in there. Ultimately, he gonna wind up in the kingdom, but he will not be saved in this time. So anyway, I'm going to read this one precept. I quoted Lucy a couple of precepts, and I'm going to read this. First of all, it says, starting from, and see, this is an argument. Give me a second. Let me do this. This is an argument. Right here, where Captain Zarek had a guy that looked like an Edomite, could be a Jake, came in. They had the Cooley or whatever brother's name is. I did a video on it, and the guy was going into having many wives, that you got to obey the government. No, it doesn't mean to obey the government. It means to not rebel against the government. That's what this means. Not to rebel. You had the Zealots and the Sicarii that took up arms against the Roman authorities, and Paul was saying, no, you're not to do that. Matter of fact, you got to pay tribute. You got to, I believe tribute is mentioned there. Right, tribute. Right. It says, render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due. Another word for tribute and dues are taxes. So you'd be stupid if you go through, you blow through a toll road, right? They're going to send you something in the mail. If you don't answer it, they'll raise the price. And they may not do nothing, but if you keep doing that, and you raise and you stacked up $1,000, $10,000, they're gonna take action. They're gonna sue you. They're gonna take your car. So Jake that says, I'm not gonna pay the toll and I'm not gonna do this, you going off. But what it really means from the first two verses is don't pick up arms against the established government. You know, like the Black Panthers and so forth, right? The Black Panthers of that day were the Zealots and the Sakari, and I'm sure there was other groups from other nations. Acts 21 tell you that the captain mistaken Paul for an Egyptian that led a band of men to take down the Roman Empire. So the original Egyptians are so-called black. So this guy looked at him, you were an Egyptian, meaning Paul looked like an Egyptian. So Paul was obviously a Jake. And Christians, Edomite Christians, they'll say, well, no, it don't really, because the Egyptians were really white, and this, that, and third. That's why you don't argue with Christians. We don't got to. Our job, the Most High didn't say go out and have debate with Christians. Fuck Christians, man. So it says here, right? Owe no man anything but to love one another. You borrow something from somebody, you give it back. Now in the brotherhood, if I know a brother needs money in the main camp, I give it to him. I don't say you owe me it. If it's a large sum, we got to get something together. You got to owe it back, or whatever the case may be. You know. But I have given brothers a couple $100 here that was, you know, and I never said, well, look, you owe me that. Nah, it's yours, man. And then what they do is they can't wait to give it back. It says, owe no man anything but to love one another. That's not talking about Esau and Ishmaelites. It's talking about among the brotherhood in Israel, not just Israelites, but in this fold. For he that loveth another have fulfilled the law. Now this is Paul. This is Paul saying. So when you say he never said, "Oh, you got to keep them law," no, the law of Christ. I'm using the word Christ. No, they still dealt. Even if you go back to Matthew 16 and 19, the rich man said. He said, "What laws? What did Yahushua say?" He said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not kill." Who is he quoting from? Was he going to go down the line and read 600 plus laws? No. He wasn't talking about the laws of so-called Christ. He was talking about the laws of Moses. So this is what Paul is saying: "For this thou shalt not commit adultery." That's a key law, because that's a law unto death. That's why the Apostle Paul condemned this guy in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. Thou shalt not kill. Does it sound familiar? Oh, that sounds like Moses' law. That's what Paul was quoting from. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness, lie. Thou shalt not covet. You look at a man's house, you want his house, or you want his woman, and that leads into adultery. And if there be any other commandments, what is he talking about? If there be any other commandment, he's talking about the rest of the 600 plus laws. It is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. It says, love the Lord with all thy heart, soul, and mind, and neighbor as thyself. It says, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Meaning, if you love your brother, you're not going to steal from him. You're not going to covet. You're not going to kill him. You're not going to steal from him. You're not going to bear false witness. You're not going to attempt to take his wife. And see, Christians don't understand that. It says, owe no man anything but to love one another among the brotherhood, not even Israel, but among this fold. For he that loveth another have fulfilled the law. And he gave you what the laws is. You ain't going to break these laws on it. If you love a man, you ain't going to commit adultery with his wife. That's why the majority of our people are not going to make it. They're going to eat missiles. Okay, Mark 12, verse 31. And the second is namely, the Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Yeah, because the laws, for the most part, apply to you doing right by Yahweh and Yahweh by Shem Yahshai, and you're doing right by your neighbor. James 2:8. If ye fulfill the royal law, and then that's the law that's going to be applied in the kingdom. A shadow of things to come is a royal law according to the scripture. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Ye do well. So what is he saying? Let's come back to the 9th verse. Those are the laws of Moses. There ain't no such thing as the law of Christ. I hate even saying that. Well, Christ just means anointed. It's a title. It's a title. So anyway, like I said, I was going to make this relatively short. Shalom, on to the next. Oh, let me do this. Before I go, let me do this. Romans 9. And you can use this on a Christian. And there's many precepts that say the same thing. Romans 9. I believe that's 31. Okay, I believe this is it. I may start at 30. Okay, what shall we say then? That the Gentiles, which the Israelites, which follow not after righteousness, the laws, have obtained righteousness. In other words, the Most High is looking at them as them keeping the laws, being perfect in the eyes of Yahweh, B'Shem Yahushai, even the righteousness which is of faith. Of faith. It starts with faith. Not the laws. That's why he said, let's go back to Colossians 2, verse 16. He said, don't let nobody judge. Do not let anyone judge you according to the high holy days, the Passover, this day, that day, feast days. He said, which is a shadow of things to come. But adultery you don't do. Animals that die of us, if it's out, you don't eat. Drain the blood out of the animal because you will die. The animal's disease, you get that disease. Diseases come through the blood. When you get bitten by a poisonous snake, where's the poison go through? It goes through your blood, the bloodline that goes throughout your body. But Israel, which followed after the laws of righteousness, have not attained the law of righteousness. Right? The law. But Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, that's the laws that was given to Moses, have not obtained to the law of righteousness because they broke the laws. It says, wherefore, because they sought it not by faith. So when you Christians jump up and say, they say you got to keep all the laws, and it ain't about faith, and it's about skin color. No, it's about faith because we broke the laws. The only way we can say we're keeping the laws perfectly if we kept the laws perfectly. Nobody kept the law. The only one that kept the laws perfectly is Yahushua. But as it were by the works of the law, for they stumble at that stumbling block. And that's what IUIC is doing. Just to mention the camp, you got to keep what, sister? Why ain't you wearing pants? Sister, why are you doing this? What, brother? You this is the Sabbath. I see you just pulled out some money and you purchase something. They don't got it, man. That's why they need a lot of gimmicks. It says, and then we listened to Nate last night, and he had a guy come in, and you can see that the guy was regurgitating what he learned. What did he say? What did Nate say? Bishop Nate say? He said, what does it mean we're not under the law? I forget what precept he pulled out. So he said, well, that means, matter of fact, I'm going to go to it. I don't think he went to Galatians, but it's in Galatians, the old foolish Galatians who bewitch you into saying you got to keep the law. And IUIC says, oh, that's talking about the Lord's sacrifice. No, it's not. It's talking about all the laws. Colossians 2, verse 16 again. It says, as it is written, behold, I lay in Zion, Israel, among Israel, a stumbling block. The scribes and the Pharisees pushing that law stuff, Matthew 23, they were pushing the law, but they weren't keeping the law. So the wicked scribes and Pharisees put a stumbling block before the Israelites. and rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. The him that you believe in is Yahushai. And you get forgiveness for Yahushai. When you go to John 8, around about the 20th verse, read a couple of verses down. I'm not going to go to it. Put it in the chat if you want. He condemned them wicked scribes and Pharisees. He called them the devil. He condemned them. He said, because they were pushing the law, they were pushing, we are Abraham's seed, and this, we were righteous, we never went into captivity. He was under captivity under the Romans. Right? So Yahushua condemned them because they didn't follow Yahushua. Had they followed Yahushua, they'd been forgiven of all their sins. Apostle Paul said in Philippians that he kept the law as far as keeping the law. A Pharisee, meaning he was an expert on the law, he knew the law. He said, but I count all things but dung. In other words, that law didn't mean nothing because I got Yahushua now. He also said that in Romans chapter 7. Anyway, with that, I'm going to say shalom. So if a Christian pop up and say, so you guys are going off because you're not coming into this thing by faith, you coming into this thing by keeping the laws and you going off. Please take them to Romans 9. You start at 30 and read to the end, 33. And then they can shut up or move to another topic. Anyway, shalom, on to the next shalom.